An unusual podcast this week. Thank you for joining us, George Bridges, former DEXU minister and many other things besides. We hope sitting in the chair next to you any minute will be David Davis, who's actually been called in to talk to the Prime Minister. Such are these extraordinary times. George, can I start by asking you about where you think Brexit needs to go now in these very unusual circumstances after this extraordinary week?
So, for the sake of disclosure, I voted to remain, but I strongly believe that we need to honour the result of the referendum and leave on the 29th of March. If you want to achieve that, clearly we need to build a parliamentary majority. And if we're going to do that, we need to take options off the table and find where there is room for compromise. To my mind, there is room for compromise around being in a customs union, probably remaining aligned on goods and agricultural produce to solve the Irish border issue and keep trade free and frictionless.
And that's where your guess is the parliamentary majority is, if it can be found.
My guess is that, partly because obviously it's the Labour Party position. Also, I should stress one other point. When you read the political declaration, it has at its kernel an approach which is very close to us being in a customs union, which is why so many people dislike it, and that's their view. And
you're nearly there, you think?
We are very nearly there. So what we would need to do is for Parliament to pass a motion that sets out its intent, or rather the intent of the UK Parliament as an instruction to government to negotiate as the final resting place of the EU and the UK relationship for us to be in a customs union. Therefore, the withdrawal agreement would remain pretty much as is. And we do need to, the Prime Minister is absolutely right, we need a withdrawal agreement and Parliament to pass that withdrawal agreement if we are to leave with a deal, obviously. So what we need to be looking at is, rather than trying to open that up, which I just don't think the European Union will do now, we need to be looking at the next stage, which is the political declaration and where we go from here.
And Theresa May had this idea for a customs union, being in a full-blown, full-fat customs union, put under her nose again and again and again in all the time she's been in number 10.
Yep.
But she never wanted to go near it. In fact, as recently as last night, you might have thought you heard her still saying the same thing. Although, so if you pass the language very carefully, it's possible she's showing signs of shifting.
I think what's interesting about what we've seen over the last 24 hours is various cabinet ministers, such as David Gauke and others, making it clear that in their mind, these options are on the table. And we don't know what's going on in these conversations between the Prime Minister and others. Maybe when David arrives, he'll tell us how open she is to these thoughts.
But in Cabinet, it doesn't sound like people come away entirely clear what is in the Prime Minister's mind.
Well, also, I mean, I don't want to sound very geeky about this, but I have been following this for a healthy amount of time. If you read the Lancaster House speech, in which the Prime Minister appeared to rule out being in a customs union.
She didn't actually.
She didn't actually rule it out in its entirety. She said she would be willing to keep elements of the customs arrangements. Now, I don't know what that means. We've never really understood what that meant. But the point is, that was then.
There was wiggle room in that speech.
Where we are now, we shouldn't get so bogged down in the policy until we have actually confronted the hard political reality, which is, if we want to leave with a deal, we are going to have to compromise between the parties and between leavers and remainers to get an approach through Parliament.
David Davis is still in with the Prime Minister, we think. He's possibly on his way towards us. But when the two of you were working in the same department in DEXU, an awful lot of people who went into ministerial jobs got more nervous about no deal the more they looked at the documents. Was that what it felt like for you?
This is where it becomes like therapy for me. So forgive me if I start reaching, trying to find a bottle of whiskey. And
it's quite early still.
Yeah, it is. It is. So I've personally always believed that we had to have no deal as an option. I don't believe you can negotiate effectively in any walk of life unless you are willing and able to walk away from the table. So I was absolutely committed, as a Remainer, but absolutely committed to making sure that we could walk away. What bothered me were two things. The first was how much focus was there in government soon after the general election and before that, actually, after the referendum, in that year between the referendum and the general election, but in particular in that first year, on no deal preparations. Because to me, there were things that we could do, that we should be doing as a government to prepare for no deal.
Concreting over some area for lorries to park,
Well,
near
preparing
Dover, that sort of thing. Physical infrastructure.
Physical infrastructure issues. Decisions we could take that would mean that we didn't actually have to do those things. So that's category 2. So that would mean, for example, potentially waving through or keeping existing customs arrangements on our side of the channel so we didn't have bottlenecks and so on and so forth. And third, issues that we knew were outside our control. And obviously that is, what does the European Union do? That's the sort of framework. Above and beyond that, I wanted us to be much more open about all this and to be far more on the front foot, saying to people, these are the issues, this is what we're doing, this is how you need to prepare, so that you built a sense of, there's a plan.
You came against a brick wall.
I won't go into too much detail about what
Possibly
I came up with.
in the form of the Prime
Let's
Minister.
just put it like this. It was very frustrating. I found it very frustrating. Not, by the way, from David. He's not here at all. I think David... But I found it frustrating in the sense of Whitehall's gears beginning to shift, well, not even beginning to shift, being very difficult to shift. Scroll forward then. And so that's the first point. There's the logistics. The second point is the politics. The politics behind this is equally important because you have to make sure that there is a political momentum, or at least a political sense that, yeah, no deal is undesirable, but it is possible and we would get through it. We did not want to land up in this position where Parliament was saying, on no account do we have no deal. But that is where we are now, and the reason for that is because the Prime Minister lost the majority in the general election. The minute we saw that exit poll, we should have all realised at that point leaving the EU without a deal was going to be very, very, very difficult indeed. And that was the moment I realised that option is pretty much off the table. And that's where we are today. You have seen over the last week Parliament passing various motions and gearing up with the Nick Bowles and Oliver Letwin and others saying we will take steps to ensure that we cannot leave without a deal.
And it looks to a lot of trained eyes as though that project, making sure that no deal cannot happen, MPs somehow coming together, throwing all conventions about sometimes the way Parliament works, but making sure that they can stop no deal. It looks as though that has a serious chance of being pulled off, doesn't it?
We shall see.
What's your...
My sense is your sense that there is wind in the sails of those who are calling for this. But it is absolutely nonetheless the case that the law says very clearly we leave on the 29th of March. So it's going to be very interesting to see how effective the mechanisms are that Nick Bowles and others have come up with, and how much parliamentary momentum there is to get to that. When we are in completely uncharted territories, as we know. This has not happened for generations, potentially hundreds of years.
This is a prototype plane that hasn't even been in a wind tunnel, let alone taken off.
It certainly hasn't happened, as far as I can tell, in recent political history. And by recent, I'd say probably since we had universal suffrage, where Parliament has taken this amount, potentially is going to take this amount of control and tell and instruct government what to do.
What happens to the Conservative Party if, and we're going to come back to this, waiting for Godot here, for David Davis, but if David Davis comes up, but what happens to the Conservative Party if Theresa May does reach across the political divide, sign up to a full-blown, full-fat customs union? I mean, we've seen it pretty strained and stressed as it is. Yeah. But we're moving into a very
we have to have a moment
dangerous moment for the party, aren't we?
Indeed. Well, I think we're already in it. I think we've been in it for months, actually. In fact, you could say we were in it from the moment that the referendum result was known, because as we know, there is a group of people in the Conservative Party who want to remain very close or even in Europe, and then you get through to the spectrum of those who want to sever all links. And part of the problem, part of the reason why we are facing the challenge that we're in today, is because we have not properly answered the question, what matters more? Trade and access to the EU or parliamentary sovereignty? And once we've made that decision, what is the negotiating position? And the reason for that is exactly as you say. This is the neuroses that has been in the Conservative brain since, for decades. Now we're coming to pass, and we are going to have a moment of deep soul-searching as a party, if the Prime Minister goes for that, to what extent those who feel deeply affronted and that this is, in their minds, a betrayal of Brexit, which I'm sure some people will say it is, were the Prime Minister to say we will remain in a customs union, whether or not that means that they feel they can no longer be in the Conservative Party, or whether they claim they are the Conservative Party. This is obviously a big moment for us. Personally, I would hope that we would be able to stay together, because I'm pretty sure that what unites us is much, much more and much greater than what divides us. And there is a danger.
But those might not be the things at the front of people's mind. Let's say if we did topple accidentally into an election within a few months' time, it's hard to see people's individual manifestos in constituencies looking alike.
Well, this is part of the reason I think that many Conservatives do not want to get into that position. And actually, I don't think, by the way, that it's just the Conservatives who think this way. I think the Labour Party also has deep divisions within it. It is not just something that is a Conservative Party problem, but the Conservatives being in government and given the strength of feeling among certain parts of the Conservative Party, and I totally respect, by the way, the people's views, but the strength of feeling means that yourself and others focus on the Conservatives more. And you're right. There is a danger that were we to go into a general election, that is exactly what we would have. We would have different parts of the party saying very, very different things.
I've just been texted by David Davis from Number 10 to say that he's sorry he is stuck with the Prime Minister in Number 10 and not able to join us, which tells you something about the outreach programme, and told other meetings have overrun as well. It also tells you that he's ignored security and not left his phone at the front door, which I'm told you're meant to do.
Yep.
Unless
he's still at the front door.
I think he's slightly texting from under the table, from what I can work out.
Could you ask him some questions then?
Yeah, we could text through and ask Theresa May some questions, maybe through
We can
the
have
phone.
a three-way conversation.
She's reaching out to people like him in a meeting now, and at the same time to people in the, let's call it the left of the party, whatever, the Remain wing of the party, and people in other parties. The SNP came in, Plaid Cymru going in a couple of hours' time, and there are conversations going on with Labour, if not with Jeremy Corbyn. How suited is Theresa May to those sorts of interactions?
Well, I mean, the proof of that will be in what happens.
Well, haven't we had the proof of it already a bit? I mean,
to be honest, Gary, I'm not going to start saying the Prime Minister isn't suited to one thing or another in terms of her personal styles and all the rest of it. I mean, I think that what we need is an open-minded approach now to where we might find room for compromise, and that does very much mean just sitting and listening to what people have to say, not taking options off the table before they've opened their mouths, and then having a proper and reasonable discussion.
And you feel they have crossed the Rubicon, the Prime Minister and her team at the very top of Number 10?
I have no idea, because I'm not that. Not that. But I mean, what is interesting is that she's been having conversations with Vince Cable, who's been going in and saying, well, actually, we want a second referendum. So I can't see that she could stop Jeremy Corbyn coming in and saying, well, I want to have a customs union. What I'm keen on, though, is that the Prime Minister can actually start then to hear and assimilate these ideas and work out where I believe we need to be, which is if we want to break out of this impasse and leave, which I think is the democratic imperative, and I stress that, we well might need to break that red line of the customs union. And I find it very difficult to see a way through without breaking that red line.
Doesn't it also involve breaking the Article 50 deadline? Is it actually feasible? Is it realistic to think that you could open up the whole future declaration?
No. This is where
and move to another place.
And
get all those people on board and still hit the March deadline.
Look, that's an absolutely fair point. Two points to make. First of all, I think that the European Union would be willing to give us a time, not an indefinite extension, but an extension for a bit, a couple of months maybe, if they can see that there is real political movement in the UK to clarify our position. Point one. Point two, as I said a moment ago, if you look at the political declaration, a lot of the elements of the kind of arrangement that I think we may want to now secure with the EU are in there. So I don't think we necessarily need to open up all of that. And in a sense, the political declaration is just that. It's a declaration. It's not a legal text. So what's much, much, much more important is that here in Parliament, we answer the question clearly that we have failed to answer for 2 years and get a compromise around, which is what matters more in our future relationship with the EU, trade and access to EU markets or parliamentary sovereignty. Because then we can enter the next phase of the negotiations with a mandate for government as to what that shape and form that negotiation, that future relationship should be.
But that's another great big question, Mark. There are enough of them around hovering over us at the moment. But what use is a deal where you shake hands with a temporary prime minister like Theresa May when it comes to a future relationship negotiation with Europe, which could go on for quite a while?
Yeah, well, look, it would be a parliamentary motion that would be passed, and it would be setting out a mandate for how we would go forward from here.
And if the Tory party ditched Theresa May straight after the Brexit date and brought in a hardline Brexiteer who didn't want to sign up to any of this, what use is that agreement?
Well, then we are into that. This could happen. That scenario.
It's not that far-fetched, is it?
That scenario. Well, it wouldn't happen that quickly because of what's happened in the last before Christmas. Because the Prime Minister now can't be challenged until next December. So there is that state. But we are all going to have to come to. It comes down to the simple point I keep coming back to. If we want to secure Brexit, we are going to have to get us over the line and leave with a deal. And that's why we need to have this compromise.
The Theresa May decision to draft those red lines looks now like one of the most hastily put together and ill thought out decisions possible, doesn't it?
I think there were a lot of people around at the time who, and I think at the time that the Lancaster House speech was being given, don't forget we still had a pretty secure parliamentary majority, and the Prime Minister was clearly aiming for what she called a bespoke agreement. Now, the problem with the bespoke agreement and setting out those red lines was she wasn't answering the question, what matters more, trade or sovereignty, but she was taking options off the table. And, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But when she lost then her parliamentary majority, having done that, her position became a lot more difficult.
It was said one of the key things that happened was that moment after losing the parliamentary majority, just after the general election, there are different ways to run a minority government. You can do what the SNP did when it first came into Holyrood, and you reach out to different parties all the time, you make them feel included. Sometimes you do them over, normal politics carries on, but you look a bit more pluralist and you reach out and you accept your minority status. There was real pressure on Theresa May to make sure that she had a locked-in majority, albeit a small one, with the DUP deal, wasn't there? It came from very senior officials in government and others, and they told her, Europe won't recognise your authority, won't think you can do anything unless you've got a majority. And that was one of the drivers of that, making the deal with the DUP.
Yeah,
which you're right to say hindsight, but with hindsight, was that right?
Well, we needed to secure the parliamentary majority, as you rightly say, and
but it didn't get you.
That was
for Brexit, but she didn't get a majority for Brexit.
But you could scroll back and you could make that argument even more so on the day after the referendum, when we woke up to, admittedly, there was a numerical majority
but not
in favour
much
of Brexit. Well, it was large, but we are still a divided country.
So probably that was the moment, really.
And you could make the case. This is all for the histories. But
history's sort of come back and bitten us a bit, hasn't it? Because if that was the right approach
we are
back in
reaping
2016,
the whirlwind of
2017,
a whole series of decisions that
we sit here on a day when Theresa May is having Plaid Cymru and people she's probably never spoken to through the front door.
We are reaping the whirlwind potentially
on the path she took, isn't
it? We are where we are. In a sense, I love this conversation in many ways, but what I'm really focused on is the fact that the clock is ticking, and we are nearing a moment where, in my mind, the wishes of 17.4 million people who voted to leave, we are running the risk that their instruction to leave is maybe overturned or put in at least extreme jeopardy if we have a second referendum. And I think that is highly unadvisable. And I would much prefer us to come to a compromise between the parties so we can leave on the 29th of March.
And the scenarios you see for Brexit being snatched, as you would see it, from these voters' hands, presumably they include not just Parliament suddenly swinging behind a second referendum, which looks quite a tough gig at the moment to imagine, but is, who knows where we'll be in a few weeks' time. But presumably also a really serious delay in Article 50. I'm told the SNP are thinking of asking for one until December. You could imagine that then sort of rolling over to another delay.
Well, this is why, coming back to your earlier question, I'm very keen that we proceed rapidly with the conversations the Prime Minister's having. Make sure that our position is, first of all, we're securing, be clear about the purpose of these conversations. The purpose of them is, in my mind, to secure a negotiating mandate for the next phase of the negotiations such that we can agree on the withdrawal agreement, get it passed, and then get on, right? So under my scenario, I'm very keen that we avoid having an extension for precisely the reasons you say, because once you've had one extension, you can have another one and another one. How does this extension end? Can there be another one? I don't know. We are again just potentially prolonging the agony. And actually, that's why I don't think, coming back to the point I made earlier, the EU will agree to an extension unless there is clearly a big political movement in the UK's polity down the road in Parliament that will enable us to say, actually, we're going to clarify all this for you, OEU.
I know you don't want to rake over old coals, as you were saying, but you worked for David Cameron. A lot of people have scratched their head recently and wondered how he would have behaved if he'd stayed there after the referendum. And it probably would have been a bit more of a reach out, an attempt to get the 48 and the 52 on the same page rather than,
maybe you'd need to ask him. But
carry the banner of the 52.
Absolutely. David was very, very good at reaching across the aisle, as they say in the States, and talking to other people. But, each to their own. And in a sense, it doesn't really matter now what he would have done. What matters is where we go from here.
Percentage chance of a second referendum, what do you put it at?
5 to 10%.
And percentage chance of no Brexit happening through all sorts of delays and other machinations?
Well, let's just be clear. Are we saying delay or no Brexit?
Well, no Brexit a year from now. Let's try that. We're still waiting a year from now.
Oh no, I think that's
very low.
That is low. I mean, I think that because I think that would only happen if there were to be another referendum, and that's one of the reasons why I'm also opposed to a referendum, because I think it will be incredibly difficult for Parliament to agree on the question, and it will take a long time, obviously, for it to set up under the law. It takes time to arrange referenda. So I think that
chance of no deal.
I would say that is diminishing rapidly. I would say that's 25%.
Chance of accidentally, as it were, toppling into it.
I'm trying to top up the numbers.
Whether you've got to 100. People very rarely do.
Yeah. I'm sorry. You're stretching my maths.
Chances of toppling into a general election, even though the government doesn't want it?
I'd say that's around 5 to 10%. Is anyone doing the maths here in the room?
I think we've got a little bit of scope and leeway. So the chances of actually...
So my view is still my base case.
Getting what you want.
My base case is still... I live in hope. I'm an optimist. The glass is always half full. So I live in hope that we will come to an agreement and sense will prevail. But let's see. I mean, who knows? Anyone who says they know what's going to happen in the next few days and weeks is... I don't think telling you the truth.
A perfect way to close a podcast that's called Politics Where Next.
Yeah.
Haven't a clue.
Yeah. Haven't a clue.
Got one of our two guests.
Yeah.
Extraordinary times. Very grateful for your time
very
and
good
answers. Thank you, George.
Thank you.